Win big with new DRF All Access past performances. With one best-in-class product, you now get all three past performance formats. Go to DRF.com and use coupon code 1FREEPP for a free single card today.
Hi everyone, David Aragona here with another edition of the TimeformUS Road to the Derby series. A major 50-point to the winner prep on tap this weekend at Oaklawn Park. Race 11 on their 12 race card is the Grade 2 Rebel Stakes. $1.25 million person, as I said, with 50 points going to the winner. The winner of the Rebel is basically guaranteed a spot in the Kentucky Derby starting gate. Arguably, the runner-up might be as well, depending on how the points race shakes out over the next few months. But we do have a likely heavy favorite in this Rebel. Even though it's a field of 13 runners, I think the number 7 Timberlake is going to be a pretty short price. He is listed at 6-5 on the morning line. Wouldn't be surprised if he even goes a tick or two lower than that, just given the strength of competition he's faced coming into this race. And the fact that this Rebel field outside of Timberlake still has a lot to prove. You see the second choice on the morning line is the number 11, Just Steel, and he certainly is the second most accomplished runner coming into this race, having picked up multiple stakes placings and being a stakes winner around one turn. But most of the horses in this race are either coming out of allowance wins or maiden competition or decisively beaten in the Southwest in their prior start. So it does feel like Timberlake is definitely the class of this field. The big question is, can he continue building on his 2-year-old form? Because this will be his sophomore debut. To get a sense of where Timberlake might be placed in the early stages of this race, let's take a look at the TimeformUS pace projector for the Rebel. And Timberlake does have plenty of early speed, and you see him shown right up in the mix there on the pace projector between those two early leaders, the number 4 Tejon Pass and the number 13 Time for Truth. Both of those runners, the 4 and 13, are horses that have done their best racing in sprints, one-turn races. So given that amount of speed that they do possess to be forwardly placed around one turn, you would imagine they'll be towards the front end of this 2-turn mile in the 16th Rebel. Timberlake is a headstrong horse. He typically does want to be forward, but we did see him rate successfully 2-back in the Champagne behind runners. So his new rider, Christian Torres, might be looking to get him to slot right in behind the leaders in the pocket early. If pace does develop, note that the number 3, Common Defense, has the LP flag on the pace projector. That indicates that he has the highest TimeformUS late pace rating of anybody in this field. Well, let's go through this field in post-position order, beginning with the number 1, Carbone. And Carbone was the beaten favorite last time in the Southwest. He got bet down all the way to 9-5 that day, and he was somewhat disappointing, finishing 7th, getting beaten over 21 lengths. We'll take a look at the replay later for another horse, but Mystic Dan won that race decisively by 8 lengths. There were big gaps between first and second, between third and fourth. So basically everybody outside of the top 3 was beaten by double-digit margins in that Southwest. Now, Carbone was contesting an honest pace that day. It's not color-coded as being a fast pace because the winner, Mystic Dan, came home so fast that it basically was a pretty moderate pace relative to the final time that the winner ran. But Carbone definitely faded after dueling with a stablemate through the early stages. He was never on the rail that day, and I do think that the rail was a slight advantage on that February 3rd card, especially late in the day. It seemed like the inside path over that muddy surface was advantageous. Carbone did not ride it, so maybe he'll do better on this spot, but I do think you have to go back to those first 2 races and just admit that he really did have all the best of it from a trip standpoint in both the maiden and allowance victory. So I think the jury is still out on where the true ability for Carbone lies between those first 2 wins and the disappointing effort in the Southwest. The number 2 is Northern Flame. Let's take a look at his last race when he was a game winner of an optional claimer N2L allowance race, going the 1 mile distance with the short stretch run at Oaklawn Park. And that's him battling back along the inside. He's going to get a challenge from Mena, who is also in this race on the outside. These two duel to the wire, and Northern Flame just finds a little bit more back towards the rail to fend off that rival who was a big price this day. And Northern Flame, he has shown ability against tougher competition in the past, particularly when he earned that career best 109 TimeformUS speed figure back in October of his 2-year-old season, finishing behind the likes of Locked and the Wine Steward in the Breeders' Futurity. That was a pretty good effort for this horse. He subsequently failed to handle a sloppy track in the street sense, and then was done no favors by a stumbling, poor start behind Carbone 2-back in an allowance race at Oaklawn Park. That race probably not a true indicator of his ability. He got back on track last time, was very headstrong through the early stages under Julian Leparoux. I don't think Leparoux was really looking to secure the lead that day, but Northern Flame just dragged him to the front end. So it's good to be interested to see if he's quite as headstrong in the early stages of this race, especially breaking from the rail. If he gets ranked behind runners, that might not be a great thing for this horse's trip. He definitely has some ability. He is coming off Lasix here. That's not the best move for Ken McPeak over the past few years, so we'll see if he can get back on track to one of his better efforts that we saw as a 2-year-old. Number 3 is Common Defense, the other Ken McPeak trained runner in this race, and he'll be having Brian Hernandez Jr. take over the services of riding him this time, whereas Leparoux was on him last time. Leparoux winds up on the stablemate Northern Flame for whatever that's worth. Common Defense, he finished 5th in the Southwest, and like I was saying with regard to Carbone, everybody outside of the top 3 beaten by large margins that day. Common Defense was a little keen through the early stages, not really wanting to settle through the first half mile to 3/8 of a mile of that race, but ultimately worked out a pretty good trip thereafter in the 2 path, went down to the rail in the stretch, and just basically made up some mild ground to pass some tired rivals. Obviously, no match for the trifecta finishers that day. He is a horse who did finish very well to break his maiden 2 back at Oaklawn Park, and that's proven to be a solid race. Horses have come back out of that January 13th maiden event to either improve or repeat their speed figures in subsequent starts, so I think that was a legitimate effort, and Common Defense did gallop out like a horse that would want more ground that day. Not sure we got to see the best of him last time in the Southwest, but maybe getting back on a fast track here in a race that features a little more pace, you would think he'll get the right kind of trip, because I think this horse has some ability. It's just a matter of whether he's really at the level to qualify for the Kentucky Derby by doing well in one of these Derby preps. The number 4 is Tejon Pass. He's one of those horses that is stretching out from sprint races. He tried the mile 2 turns last time out in a January 28th allowance race. There were actually 2 divisions of that race. Northern Flame won one of them. The other was won by Woodcourt, who we'll get to in a little bit. Tejon Pass was no match for Woodcourt or Next Level, who are both back in this race, and just felt like a horse that maybe didn't see out the distance that day. And based on his sprint races, you kind of get that sense. They targeted him as a sprinter early on in his career, took 5 starts to try the 2 turns for the first time, and he just didn't really show much improvement going the 2-turn mile, now stretching out an extra 16th. Feels like a major hurdle for a horse that wants to be forward and could have some pace pressure both to his inside and outside. The number 5 is Magic Grant, and it's just kind of hard to find an excuse for this horse's Southwest. He went off at a big price that day, was far back at every stage of the race, really never launched a run. And when you go back to his 2 prior races, the 2 times that he achieved better results, he got extremely fast paces in both of those races, particularly his maiden victory, where it just fell apart from a pace standpoint, and he was able to swoop past the entire field to victory. And then the race was falling apart too back in the Springboard Mile, but he still could do no better than to finish 3rd that day, and just feels like he achieved those results against weaker competition with good setups. Not sure he's going to be able to step up against this tougher field in the Rebel. The number 6 is Dymatic. He is a Steve Asmussen trained runner coming off a maiden victory, which we'll take a look at here. This was actually on the Southwest undercard, the 6th race of the day, right in the middle of the day at Oaklawn. And not sure that the rail bias had really materialized at this point in the day that I think really impacted the Southwest later on. But you do want to note that Dymatic got a very good trip. What you'll see happen right here is he gets really green approaching those tire tracks at about the 16th pull, and he veers out. Good job by Joel Rosario to basically keep him going straight. And you can see it gives him a few reminders to correct him to keep running straight through the wire. That definitely affected the margin of victory for Dymatic. I think he would have gone on to win that race by about 5 lengths without spooking at those tire tracks in mid-stretch. So maybe you want to upgrade that speed figure a little bit. But what I was getting at prior to that is he did get a very good trip up until that point at mid-stretch. He was riding the rail down the backstretch around the far turn. I do think that you wanted to be inside, even at that point of the day at Oaklawn Park on February 3rd. And also, he got some pace to close into. So this is a horse who has been improving with each and every start. I think he's definitely going to have to take another step forward to even hit the board in this Rebel, but he does seem like one who's got some upward mobility. He's got a nice pedigree by gun runner. He's actually a full brother to Dreamlike, who was 2nd in the Grade 1 Pennsylvania Derby last year. So some upside for Dymatic, but he's going to need to improve. The number 7 is that prohibitive morning line favorite Timberlake. We'll actually go 2 starts back in his past performances to take a look at his grade 1 Champagne victory. And this was the best version of Timberlake that we saw during his 2-year-old season. Obviously, he handled a sloppy track on this day, but he's a horse who can handle any kind of going. And what I really liked about this Champagne was that he actually rated kindly in behind horses on the backstretch. And he is a horse that in a couple of his races has gotten pretty keen, not really wanting to rate in behind horses taking kickback. We saw that in the hopeful 3-back when he got 2 rank in the blinkers. They took the blinkers off for that Champagne, and he ran the most professional race of his career to win off, drawing away by 4 lengths. He beat some good rivals that day who did come back to run well in subsequent starts. Then he stepped up into the Breeders' Cup, trying the 2 turns for the first time, and he was back to his old habits. He didn't break that sharply, not a disastrous start by any means, but he proceeded to get ranked behind what was a moderate to slow pace, and maybe the fact that they tried to rate him behind that moderate pace just really did not work for this horse's characteristics. He was behaving very strongly through the clubhouse turn run, just not really wanting to settle under Florent Giroux, who tried to angle him to the outside, and from there, he just basically went 4 wide around the far turn, was trying to make up ground in a race that was mostly dominated towards the front end by Fierceness, who ran a big race but did get a perfect trip to win. And although Timberlake was passed at the end by Locked for 3rd, I still thought he stayed on pretty well to earn a 1:15 TimeformUS speed figure. That matches the number that he got winning the Champagne 2 back, and those numbers, including the number that he got breaking his maiden all the way back in the summer of his 2-year-old season, they just make him far and away the fastest horse in this Rebel. And from his 2-year-old to 3-year-old season, you would anticipate that he could potentially improve on that form that he showed last year. So he is just way the horse to beat any way that you want to slice it. And furthermore, if you have doubts that he might improve as a 3-year-old, just take a look at his workouts. I've watched a couple of them, which you can find online, and he was very impressive in that February 10th work, outworking a Brad Cox trained stablemate, Catching Freedom, who actually came back to run pretty well in the Risen Star last week. Timberlake, he is a good horse in the morning, but he just seems to be thriving ahead of his 3-year-old debut, and he certainly found the right kind of race to come back in this Rebel. The number 8 is Next Level. We'll take a look at his last race, which was one division of those optional claimers that were run on January 28th at Oaklawn Park. And he comes widest into the stretch here. And this was a new kind of trip for Next Level, who previously had been more of a front running type. They took him back at the start this day, tried to close from off the pace. And you could see he makes a nice run down the center of the course. Looks like he's going to get there in mid-stretch and just hangs a little bit on the money to get beaten by Woodcourt, who is back in this race. Woodcourt probably got the better trip than Next Level, because Next Level had to go wider around the far turn that day, taking a 4-wide trip around that second turn, and he finished up okay, but only got a 99 TimeformUS speed figure for that performance. He really has not built on that 3rd place finish in the Grade 1 Del Mar Futurity from last summer. Looked like a horse with potential that day, but his performances have been kind of up and down since then. He got cooked in a fast pace 2 back in the Gun Runner, dueling with Track Phantom early before getting disposed of by that foe. So Next Level is going to have to do a little bit better than last time, but at least he showed that new dimension to be able to come from off the pace, and I think that's going to be the right kind of running style to use in this potentially fast-paced Rebel. The number 9 is Laginos, and he seems like another horse that could be involved in the early pace. He led from the start of the Smarty Jones before getting tired in the late stages that day, beaten by one of today's rivals, Just Steel. Some horses have come back out of the Smarty Jones to run well. Catching Freedom returned to finish 3rd in the Risen Star, as I already said. And the top 2 finishers from the Southwest, Just Steel included, and Mystic Dan, they were both coming out of that Smarty Jones. Mystic Dan, the 5th place finisher that day, and came back to win the Southwest in his next start. So that might be a stronger race than it initially appeared for Laginos, but still, he really did get things his own way when he won that off the turf allowance race 2 back, was facing a depleted field that day of some horses who maybe were more meant for the turf, didn't come back as the strongest affair overall from a speed figure standpoint. And furthermore, I just have some questions about how far this horse really wants to go. I know that he won going the mile in the 16th 2 back, but he did so in a slower paced race, and he's got more of a sprinty 1-turn, somewhat turf pedigree, especially on the dam side. So I do wonder if this 2-turn route distances are really going to be his forte. The number 10 is Mena. We already took a look at one of his replays when I talked about Northern Flame a little bit earlier, and Mena was the horse that was closing on the outside to just barely lose that race at 31-1. It was a big step forward for this horse, first off the trainer switch to trainer Steve Hobby, and he's a horse who showed some ability and it's weaker early on. He actually broke his maiden and a maiden claimer for Brad Cox before getting claimed away from that conditioner that day. came back in a starter allowance again, won quite easily. He's been steadily stepping up the class ladder. The problem is he's yet to run a particularly fast speed figure. He's going to have to do better than almost getting it done against Northern Flame last time if he's going to be successful here. And he did get a pretty good trip that day to be second. So he just feels like yet another horse that's going to really have to improve in this Rebel. The number 11 is Just Steel, and he's the most experienced member of this field already with 9 starts under his belt. We'll take a look at his last race right here when he was a good second in the Southwest. Obviously, no match for the winner, Mystic Dan, who scoots up the inside and finishes with vigor that you rarely see horses stride out like over the sloppy track. You could see Mystic Dan really relishing the going, but I thought that Just Steel had the much tougher trip up until this point. He was never towards the inside over a track that I do think you wanted to save ground on the rail. He was basically 3 wide every step of the way, traveled pretty keenly through the early stages, and did well to make a nice move to challenge for the lead at the top of the stretch before ultimately settling for second that day. He also ran well in the Smarty Jones 2-back. That was another honest pace that he contested while racing 3 wide throughout and still stayed on well for second. I do have doubts about whether this horse really wants to go beyond a mile, even though he's run some of his best 2 races in the last 2 starts. He feels to me like a horse that is more of that 7 furlong to a mile specialist that's just doing well in these races because he's pretty talented, and he might be talented enough to do well in this mile in a 16th affair as well, because it did not come up as the strongest edition of the Rebel from top to bottom. Just wonder if he's going to have another wide trip coming to him from post 11 once again. The number 12 is Woodcourt, and he was the winner of that optional claiming race we took a look at when Next Level was second. And while Woodcourt did have some minor trouble into the clubhouse turn, he got a very good trip after that, getting over towards the inside under Manny Esquivel and saving ground, coming around the far turn, shifting in an upper stretch and coming through along the inside. Just a trip that worked out for him that day, and he was able to get up to win by a head. It was his first start off the claim for Cipriano Contreras, who has really been firing on all cylinders at the Oaklawn Park meet. So definitely a horse that seemed to step forward for the new barn that day. But overall, he's a horse that's just been a cut below the top runners in this division and feels like he would need to take yet another big step forward, especially breaking from this outside post if he were going to be successful in the Rebel. And then drawn on the outside is the number 13, Time for Truth. He's got some speed figure power coming into this race. That 111 that he earned on debut is one of the fastest numbers of anybody in this field, and he backed it up last time with a good second-place finish in the Ozark behind Valentine Candy, who's sort of been the ruler of that dirt sprint division for the 3-year-olds at Oaklawn Park this winter. The problem is Time for Truth has competed twice over 6 furlongs. Now he's trying to stretch out to a mile and a 16 for the first time. Watching this horse's races, he just strikes me as much more of a sprinting type, and he's done no favors by the post position, breaking from number 13 in this large field with plenty of speed drawn to his inside. He's probably going to have to work pretty hard if he wants to get to the front end like he has in both of his prior sprint starts. So just feels like it could be a tough assignment for Time for Truth. A horse with talent, just not sure that this is the right spot for him. Well, let's throw up my picks for this Rebel Stakes, and I'm just not getting too creative here. I think that the number 7, Timberlake, just has a real class edge on this field coming in. I love the way that he's trading. I think even some of his 2-year-old performances are underrated and just feels like the right kind of spot for this Brad Cox trainee to kick off his 3-year-old campaign with a win. So I looked and looked to try to find an alternative for this horse coming off the layoff at a short price. I just think Timberlake is probably going to win. And I've got the number 11, Just Steel, in second. I was really impressed with his Rebel. Don't necessarily view him as the kind of horse that's going to have success in the Kentucky Derby down the line, but he just seems like a horse that is in great form coming into this next step on the Oaklawn road to the Kentucky Derby. So chalky exacta for me this week, but I think Timberlake, looking for a big performance out of him in the Rebel Stakes on Saturday. Good luck if you're playing the races this weekend.